Um, Welcome everyone to Advocacy Essentials. I just want to start by saying each of us has a story to tell. We all have our own life story, things that we experience um, in our lives with our families, with employment or school, sometimes in any other groups you may be a part of, church or anything. And as we experience all of these things through our life, we learn. And sometimes we experience things that make us angry. Sometimes we experience things that make us sad or things that make us happy. But all of these things come together to give us a story that we can tell others to help move them to action. Learning how to tell your story can help encourage you to join others as well to join you in creating change. You guys can see the presentation, right? Everything's working there. Okay,
Yes, everything looks good.
perfect. So you might ask, why should you tell your story to legislators? Well, um, one way that persuasive leaders are able to convince people to to move to action is by telling stories. They do also use things like data and numbers and statistics, but a big part of getting people to actually hear your story and remembering it is adding in some of that emotional reasoning. We all make decisions based off of both our head and our heart, not just the one. Some people may rely a little bit more or less on the head or on the heart part, but we all use a little bit of both of that to help us decide what decisions, what actions we will take. So, as you're telling your story, think a little bit about how you can use both of these elements. Um, you can use facts and data and statistics to help prove your point and show the evidence and show how something can be changed. And then you can use your heart and your personal story to help give them an idea of what this actually means for real people in their real life. Why does something needs to change? And then also, before I get going too quick on this presentation, I just want to remind you, lawmakers want to hear from you. They are just regular people who happen to meet up at the Capitol for 45 days every year and make the laws. But in Utah, since we have a part-time legislature, that's not their full-time job. Most of them have other jobs. They have families. They have other community responsibilities. And they aren't experts in policy. They aren't experts in all the different areas of policy. So they don't know everything. They don't actually know how the disability service system runs unless they've been in the legislature for a while, or if they have a family member or a close friend who is experiencing going through the disability system, the applications and getting providers and doing all of that. So unless they have a personal experience with it, which many of them do not, they don't actually know about this unless they hear from you. So you guys are the experts in your own lives. You're the experts on how this disability that you or your family member or friend, how it affects you, how it affects them, how it affects your work, how it affects your home life. You are the expert of your life. And so when lawmakers are making decisions, they need to hear from everyone who knows about this topic. They need to hear from the experts so that they can make informed decisions. And since you guys are the experts in this area, they need to hear from you. Also, lawmakers are elected by the public. So that means that we need to keep them accountable. and remind them what we as the public want to see happen. They know that if they aren't listening to their constituents, they might not get reelected. And so they do want to hear from you to know what it is that you want them to do. They may or may not always do what you tell them you want them to do, but they at least want to hear that so that they can get a more informed decision. And more than just wanting to hear from you, they do need to hear from you. Like I said before, they don't know everything and they don't know about your situation. And so if they don't hear about your situation, then they're not going to know that something needs to change.
Mary, I just want to let you know, I'm now seeing two black boxes over your slides up at the top. I'm not sure if that is something on your screen that we can.
See, did it go away or is it still there?
The bottom one did. There's still a top one.
Is it, I mean, I have like the Zoom controls up top. I'm thinking that
It
might be
could
what
be
it
that.
is.
It could be that. I don't know if you want to try to move them to the side or to the bottom.
Let's see if I can do that. Okay. Is that a little bit better?
Yeah. Yes. I'll let you know
Okay.
if I see it's on the bottom. I'll let you know if it ends up covering up words, but that should be better as far as covering up text.
Okay. Sounds good. All right. Perfect. Well, I was going to see if I could slide it down a little bit more, but that's as far down as it'll go. Okay. So, all right. And then my last note is to come as you are. Um, they need to get to know you. So when you're coming up to the legislature, either in person or if you just message people virtually or join meetings virtually, if coming up to the Capitol is not something that's realistic for you, then just as a reminder, just to come as you are. Obviously, you want to dress nice, but that means different things to different people. You don't need to be in a suit or like a dress shirt and a blazer. You could wear a sweater, like whatever it is, just something that you're comfortable in and that feels natural to you. Um, if you like, it can sound kind of silly, but if you're wearing your favorite pair of pants and a comfy sweater, that can actually help you feel a little bit more comfortable than if you're in really uncomfortable clothes. And coming up and speaking to people at the legislature, at the Capitol, can be kind of nerve-wracking. So if you have one area where you can kind of give yourself a little bit of comfort, I say take it. Um, so just remember to come as you are, and honestly, they'll remember you more if you come as yourself. People can tell when you're being genuine and when you're not being genuine. And if you come and you leave a good impression and you let your personality shine through, then they are a lot more likely to remember you and to want to help you. All right, so getting into the meat of the presentation. Some things that you may want to talk about with legislators, problems that you see that you want fixed, or ideas that you have to make the situation better, or concerns that you or your family or your friends might have in your neighborhood. So I know for a lot of people in the disability community, some of the problems that many people see, one of the problems is funding, right, for the wait list. The Medicaid home and community-based services have a big, long wait list with thousands of people that need help. And that's a problem, honestly. The fact that we are not able to get services to those people, that's a problem. And so if you guys have ideas to make the situation better, or if you just want to send your voice to add to anyone else saying, we need funding, please prioritize this, that's something that you could focus on. Um, some other people may have concerns about employment. If you are a person with a disability and you have a job, you may see other areas, other issues in that area that some other people may not see if they are in that situation. You may see unfair pay or unfair hiring or unfair treatment in the workplace. Um, if you see any discrimination based on your disability, that's something that you could bring up to a legislator and talk about and try to get them to think of ideas for how to fix that. There are some different ways that you can find out about issues. Obviously, one is your personal experience. If you see something in your life or your family or your friends, then that's something that you can bring up. But there are also other ways that you can see about different issues. So you can follow different organizations like the Utah Developmental Disabilities Council, the Legislative Coalition for People with Disabilities, the Disability Law Center, the Institute for Disability Research Policy and Practice, the wonderful people at USU that are hosting us today and hosting all of the webinars this weekend. Any organization that deals with the issues that you're interested in, you can follow them and get more information. I know a lot of people have newsletters, so you can get a monthly newsletter and get different items, any news updates in those newsletters. A lot of people also have Facebook profiles. And so if you have Facebook, you can go and you can follow that page. And occasionally these different organizations will post if there's an issue that's come up or if they're working on a bill or if they're connecting with legislators, they'll often post that on their social media platforms. And so that's a place where you can also see some issues that may be coming up at this time. And then also, of course, their websites. I know the Disability Law Center has a whole section on their website for public policy. And throughout the legislative session, they put weekly updates. I think that's called the Policy Corner. And they put updates about different bills and different things that are happening every week during the legislative session. So that can also be a great way for you to keep up with what's going on. And then also, if you watch the news or read the newspaper, or if you get the news in another format, I know a lot of us nowadays see news through our social media profiles and our social media apps. If that's where you get your news, you can see if you see issues that other people in the community, maybe people you don't know, if they are experiencing an issue that's related to something you're experiencing, that can be a great way for you to see, okay, this isn't just me experiencing this. This is a lot of people experiencing this. We could get together. We could talk to the legislature. We could make a difference here. All right. So thinking about your story and what you might want to share. Let's see. So when you're thinking about what you might want to share with legislators of your personal story, you can keep it simple. And later on, I have a bit of an outline of like what you can kind of a template for how to get your story together. But just thinking about what things do you experience that you think someone who doesn't have a disability may not know about. So anything that you would want to share with them so that they can understand what you're experiencing, um, that's something that you can share. Um, let's see. Sorry, I think I was expecting to see a different slide. I think it's in a different order than I thought it was. Okay, it's okay. We'll get there. So there are different ways that you can communicate with your legislators. One is just through letters or emails if you prefer digital platforms. If you're still old school and you like to handwrite or type up and print a letter and send it in the mail, that's totally fine. But if you prefer to just write it in an email and send it, that also works. If you do live in a legislator's district and you are contacting them, I would just include right at the beginning or in the subject line, if you're sending an email, I live in your district. That kind of helps set off an alarm in their head of like, okay, this is someone who votes for me. I really need to prioritize them. Sometimes during the legislative session, they are getting dozens or even hundreds of emails. And so um, if you are sending a letter or an email, I would say to just try to keep it concise, no more than a page, and that'll just help include increase the likelihood of them seeing and reading through your email. Another way that you can communicate with legislators is through social media. So Facebook, X, which is the new name for Twitter, for anyone who's not aware, Instagram, any social media platform that you can find your legislator on, you can communicate with them there. I don't know if a lot of the Utah legislators have Instagram, but many of them have Facebooks and X accounts. So you can friend them on there or follow their page. And that can be a great option for real-time conversations during the session. So, for example, some will have their phone with them when they're on the floor, and people may, I guess with Twitter, it was called tweeting them. On X, you might just tag them in a post saying, hey, you're going to be voting on this bill soon. You should vote yes, or you should vote no, depending on what you want them to do. And that's something that they might see in real time. So you don't have to wait for them to go check their email. They'll just get a notification from their social media and see it right then. Another way you can communicate is through calls or phone messaging. Some legislators will also have a number that you can text. Usually usually when I see that is like if I email them and I say, I'd love to talk to you more about this, sometimes they'll respond, awesome. I check my texts more than my emails. Please see this number. And then you can use that phone number to text them. Other ways that you can communicate with legislators, you can give public comment in committee meetings. And that's a great option if you're wanting to communicate with many legislators at once, not just one specifically. And I believe the presentation tomorrow evening, they're going to go a little bit deeper into committees and how you can see when committees meet and when you can give public comment at those committee meetings. So be sure to go to tomorrow's for more information. We'll go over that a little bit more later in this presentation, but I'm not going to go quite as deep as they would tomorrow. But I will also note with public comment, you don't have to go in person. It is an option to go in person and you can show up in the room. But they all nowadays have a virtual option as well. They stream it live and they have options for you to join those meetings to give public comment through that as well. Another way, if you're wanting to meet with a specific legislator, you could make an appointment to meet with them either in person or virtually. Or you can find legislators at the Capitol if you want to be up at the Capitol building and see people face to face. You can go up there during the session. It's started last week and it is going until the 1st of March. And so for the next about month and a half, they're going to be up there every day, Monday through Friday, in meetings, on the floor, just doing votes and hearing about bills. And so if you want to go and find them, you can go and wait outside the rooms, outside the Senate room or outside the House floor, and you can catch them between meetings. Sometimes that's a good way to just get a few minutes in because they aren't always able to make a full appointment during the session just because they are so busy. So they might not have time for a 10 to 30-minute meeting, but you can just find them as they're going from one meeting to another and walk with them. Um, and you'll get about 30 seconds to 2 minutes to be able to share a little bit with them there. Another option is also sending a note to the floor when they're in session, when the Senate is in session and they're all on the Senate floor, all the senators together, and they're discussing and voting on bills, or the other side, the House of Representatives, when they're all on the floor and discussing bills. You do have an option to pull a legislator out for a minute to speak with them. And the way you do that is outside those rooms, there are desks with a couple people there, and they have little papers. It's either green papers or blue papers, depending on if you're on the House side or the Senate side. And it'll just ask for your name, where you live, and which legislator you want to talk to. And you can write just a couple sentences about what you want to talk to them about. So you could be like, I want to talk to you about this bill before you vote. Please come out and see me. And then those guys will take the note into the legislator. And if the legislator has a couple minutes, they'll come out into the hallway. And then you'll have about 30 to 60 seconds, maybe a little bit longer, but I would try to keep it short if you're pulling them off the floor, um, just because they do have to get back in there so that they can vote on the issues. All right, let's go a little deeper into some of these different methods. Communication. So drafting a letter or email. These are some of the elements that you might want to include in your email. So first off, introducing yourself, your name, where you live. And I don't mean where you live like your actual address, just like the city that you live in. If you are the constituent of whoever you're writing to, again, mention that. And then going into what is the problem that you see. Introduce that problem. If you have a specific story to illustrate that problem, you could share that story. Or if it's just a general trend you see, you might just kind of explain these are some of the different things that I see going on in maybe in my child's school, and these are the issues that it's causing. And so thinking of your problem in terms of not just yourself, but others, if you see many people are struggling with this, trying to make the legislators see that this is a big issue that's affecting lots of people, that can help kind of get that issue a little bit more stuck in their mind if they see that it's affecting a lot of people. And then thinking about your story. You can include in your letters or in your emails, you can always include a picture of you or your family. That can be good for them to have a visual, kind of put a face to the story. You can describe yourself. If you want to kind of make yourself a bit more personal, make yourself seem not just like words on a paper, but a real person. You can kind of explain your life, things that you love to do. That especially if you like to do something that they also like to do, that can be a point of connection. And then going into describing why you're concerned about this specific problem. So for example, if you have a child with a disability who's in school, and maybe your school that she's at doesn't have all the supports necessary for her to be able to participate with the other children. And so, for example, you might explain what happens when she doesn't have the supports needed to be able to participate with the rest of the class. You could explain she is isolated. Maybe she's in a different room some of the times and she doesn't get to see friends or have that social connection. She might feel left out, and just kind of explaining how this is affecting her. Maybe it's making it so that she doesn't want to go to school and she's having a hard time focusing and actually engaging with the people at school. And so it's impacting her education, or it's impacting her mental health. And you can kind of explain how this problem of not having proper supports in the school, how that is leading to all these effects in her life that are hurting her. And how, if she did have those supports, or maybe she had those supports last year and she was thriving, and you can explain the difference that you're seeing and say, hey, when children have these supports, they are able to participate, they're able to integrate with the other students, they don't feel excluded, they don't feel othered, they feel like they're part of a community, and that helps them connect with people, and that helps them actually pay attention in school, and it helps her understand her math lessons, and that will help her set her up for a future where she can maybe get higher education and get a job, and then that could help her participate in contributing to the community and in this way. Or maybe in another way, if they like to volunteer and they don't want to have a job, but they want to get involved in some other way, and just kind of helping them show how this issue is causing problems in many different areas. Um, and I would also suggest, if you are looking at different legislators, if you know anything about that legislator and kind of what they value family, or if they value um, like maybe they've done a lot of work on mental health, or they've done a lot of work on behavioral health, or they've done a lot of work on um, employment and economic development, just depending on kind of what the legislator focuses on. You might try and make some more examples in that area to try and make it kind of resonate a little bit more with them. Um, and then when you are writing your letter, always make sure you have some sort of action for them, what you would want them to do. So if you're writing them about a specific bill or a specific funding item, your action might be as simple as, I want you to vote yes on HB 503 or whatever it is. Um, if you're writing them not during the session and there's no specific bill that you have in mind, but you just want them to be more aware of the issue and to maybe brainstorm some ideas of what they could do, then your ask might be, I would love to meet with you to give more examples of how this issue is affecting people, or to brainstorm ideas. So just whatever it is that you're asking them to do, make that very clear by the end of your letter, that this is what I want you to do because of this. Alrighty.
Mary, before you go ahead, we do have a question in the chat from Sydney Smith. She asks, how do I share a personal story to legislators / aides that are bipartisan yet align with values that seek justice for individuals with disabilities?
Okay. Let me do that again. How do I share personal story to legislators that are bipartisan yet align with values that seek justice for individuals with disabilities? Well, I would say one thing I would say, because that is a good point, the bipartisan looking at it. I would say no matter who you're talking to, I would always try to avoid specific um, anything that's specifically political or specific to a political party. I would try to avoid any partisan speaking. Like you don't need to identify yourself as a Republican or a Democrat or independent. And also, we want to make sure that we aren't arguing, we don't accidentally get into an argument with them, because that will not help and we'll just end up getting frustrated. So I would just say always just try to focus on Um, Focus on sharing your experience and let's see. And you can, so when you go onto the legislative website, you can see, you can go onto specific legislators' pages and you can see their background. So, like if they, what their education was in, what they do for a job, for their career. And so, for example, maybe you see a legislator who has done a lot. He's an economist. He really focuses on the economy. And you're like, okay, well, yes, he very well may care about mental health and like that's an important aspect. But if you know that they are really an economy and like a money focused, budget focused mindset, you might even try to add in parts of your story about like financial stability. You might say, well, we're on the wait list and to get Medicaid services for my child. And without those services, I'm trying to, like, it's impossible or really difficult to afford getting her those services without the Medicaid help because maybe your child requires a lot of at-home time, and so both parents aren't able to hold full-time jobs, or maybe you're a single parent, and so you're struggling holding a job while also raising your children by yourself, especially with a child with disabilities who requires maybe a little bit more attention throughout the day. And you can explain how it's making it hard for you to be able to have a consistent, stable employment, to be able to be financially independent and not have to rely on unemployment income or welfare in other areas from the state. And you can just kind of talk about how, um, I mean, you can even give them numbers. You can say, this is how much it would cost for us to pay for all of her supports without Medicaid aid. And we are unable to do that. And so that would put us in a unstable financial situation. And so that, when you're talking about money, you're like, okay, I feel like maybe this isn't as convincing as, mental health. And for many people, it's not. Focusing on the mental health is going to be more moving. But for someone who is really focused on budgets and numbers, you might want to add a little bit of that stuff in to help them see we want to be able to have financial independence and financial stability. And we're having a hard time doing that. But if we were in services, then we would be able like I would be able to hold a full-time job and then I would be able to provide for my family. And that's maybe something that they really value. Um, I don't know if that fully answered the question. Feel free to ask more questions if it did not. Alrighty.
Thanks, Mary. And just a reminder to close your chat just in case.
Yes. Alrighty. Oh, too far. Okay, so just a little bit talking a little bit more about virtual advocacy. Sometimes we may feel like going in person is the only option, but with the technology available today, there are so many ways that we can communicate with our legislators, both during the session and outside of the session throughout the year. Um, and these is just kind of going over the same things that I mentioned: letters, emails, social media, and any virtual meetings. This is a great option for people who live outside of the main like Salt Lake area, especially if you live in rural areas of Utah where you're not able to commute up to the Capitol to meet people. You may rely more on technology and on virtual options for your advocacy. Or even if you do live near the Capitol, maybe you aren't able to get respite. You're not able to find someone to take care of your kids, for half a day while you go up to Salt Lake City, find parking, and go and meet with people and come back. Or maybe, especially since there's so much construction happening right now, you might be like, I don't want to go up there and have to look for a parking spot. And what if I can't find a parking spot and that gets me stressed? Totally fair. There are so many ways that you can advocate effectively without actually having to go in person. So some ways of advocating virtually, like we said, contacting people through email, or having Zoom meetings. You can set up one-on-one meetings with people and still talk to them face-to-face through a camera, without actually having to leave your house, which is a great option now. And there's also ways you can connect with other people who aren't just legislators. You can, if you're on social media, you might connect with someone who lives in a different part of the state, but you guys both have similar experiences and you're having similar problems. And maybe you want to communicate and work together to support each other in your advocacy effort. You can also, as I said, if you're following different organizations, a lot of organizations during the legislative session, they'll have I almost said advocacy alerts. They'll have action alerts when certain bills are being heard. They'll send out emails saying how you can let your legislators know what you want them to do and how you want them to vote on a specific item. Alrighty. But then if you do want to do things, maybe you do want to talk face-to-face with legislators, one option for that, like I said, is giving public comment. So just a little bit more about the public comment. All the legislators are assigned to various legislative committees that talk about different subject areas. So, for example, there's a Health and Human Services Committee, and they focus on a lot of the social supports, a lot of social policy issues, anything that's related to health. And so a lot of the disability bills go through the Health and Human Services Committee, just because it tends to be related through either the health aspect or since the Medicaid waivers were through DHS before the health services or the health department and the human services department are now combined into one. So when they are hearing about different bills, they always give an option for members of the public to give a comment during the committee meetings. And so I just want to show this little example of someone giving a public comment. Her name is Judy Human. She was a huge disability rights activist. She just passed away last year, but she has been advocating throughout her entire life. So I just want to show this short video. It's a couple minutes long. This was back when before the ADA passed. So back when they were the disability rights advocates were trying to get the ADA passed. So this was her public comment to a committee.
When I was 5, my mother proudly pushed my wheelchair to...
Quick question, can you hear that all right?
Yes.
Okay. Perfect.
The way we as Americans should have to live our lives. When I was 5, my mother proudly pushed my wheelchair to our local public school, where I was promptly refused admission because the principal ruled that I was, quote, a fire hazard, end quote. I was forced to go on to home instruction, receiving 1 hour of education twice a week for 3.5 years. Was this the America of my parents' dreams? My entrance into mainstream society was blocked by discrimination and segregation. Segregation was not only on an institutional level, but also acted as an obstruction to social integration. As a teenager, I could not travel with my friends on the bus because it was not accessible. At my graduation from high school, the principal attempted to prevent me from accepting an award in a ceremony on stage simply because I was in a wheelchair. When I was 19, the house mother of my college dormitory refused me admission into the dorm because I was in a wheelchair and needed assistance. When I was 21 years old, I was denied an elementary school teaching credential because of, quote, paralysis of both lower extremities, sequelae of poliomyelitis, end quote. At the time, I didn't know what sequelae meant. I went to the dictionary and looked it up and found out that it was because of. So it was obviously because of my disability that I was discriminated against. At the age of 25, I was told to leave a plane on my return trip to my job here in the U.S. Senate because I was flying without an attendant. In 1981, an attempt was made to forcibly remove me and another disabled friend from an auction house because we were, quote, disgusting to look at, end quote. In 1983, a manager at a movie theater attempted to keep my disabled friend and myself out of his theater because we could not transfer out of our wheelchairs. These are only a few examples of discrimination I have faced in my 40-year life. I successfully fought all of these attempted acts at aggressive confrontation or litigation. But this stigma scars for life. Many disabled persons experience discrimination of the same magnitude, but not every one of us possesses the intestinal fortitude and has the support of family and friends required to face up to these daily societal barriers. Sadly, these are not isolated examples true only in the past tense. This is an ongoing social phenomena which haunts our lives at every minute. I have been told throughout my life to be understanding of these people's actions. Quote, they don't know any better, end quote. Neither I nor any one of the 42 million other people with disabilities can wait for the 200 million non-disabled Americans to become educated to the fact that disability does not negate our entitlement to the same constitutional rights
as they have. That was the end of the clip. All right, so as you see there, she had many examples of ways that she has been discriminated against throughout her life, simply because of her disability. And for some other people there could have been other people growing up in her same neighborhood that had no idea about any of these things happening because they didn't have a disability, and so they didn't see it. So the only way, like she said, just because they don't know any better doesn't mean that we have to sit down and just let discrimination continue just because they aren't aware. What we can do is we can make our voices heard. We can make it so that they do hear about these issues. They do know what's going on, and they can't use that as an excuse forever of, oh, well, I wasn't aware. Well, we're telling you, so now you're aware. And now you've got to do something about it. All righty. And then just another note on public comment. There are many different types of comments, honestly, that are powerful. It's powerful when you have many examples of discrimination. It can be powerful if you just share one and how that's affected you. But what's most powerful is hearing from the people who are experiencing this every day. We talk to legislators a lot as people who work in this profession, but what we often hear from them is, okay, so where are the people who are experiencing this? We want to hear from them. We want to hear from them directly. We want to ask them our questions. We want to know their story. We want them to come and tell us their story. And unfortunately, a lot of people who are experiencing these things, you don't have a lot of extra time. And so it can be a sacrifice to go and give public comment, especially if you're trying to go in person. Luckily, now we can do some virtual comments, but it is really powerful when they hear from the people who are actually experiencing this every day. All right. Let's see.
When I was 5,
There we go. So if you do decide that you want to give public comment, there are a few things that you can do to prepare. So first, you're going to want to know what is the topic that you want to focus on. Is there a specific bill that you're referring to, or is it a funding item? If so, mention that and say specifically which thing you're speaking to, which item you're speaking to. And then think about, how do you feel about this bill? How do other people feel about this bill? What would this do? What would this bill do if it were to pass? How would it affect you? How would it affect the people you know? Also thinking about, what are the rules for the committee? Some committees you have to sign up beforehand to give public comment. Some committees you can just show up and they'll ask for people to raise their hands when you get there. You can figure that out on the committee's webpage on the legislative website. The legislative website, I've mentioned that a couple times. It's LE, as in the letters, le.utah.gov. And on there, you can find at the top, there's a bar with a bunch of different options, like tabs. There's one that says committees. If you go there, you can go find a list of all the committees, click on the committee you're interested in, and then it'll tell you when their meetings are, where the meetings are, and it'll have the agenda for each meeting, the things that they're planning on discussing during that meeting. When you look on the agenda, it generally says on there if you just show up to the committee meeting or if you have to like call a number or sign up beforehand. And then some other things you might want to consider when you're preparing public comment is who serves on the committee. So if you know any legislators are on there, have those legislators supported similar issues in the past? Have they opposed similar issues in the past? And just thinking about, what things do they value? All right, so when you're preparing your talking points, try to keep them brief. You usually only have 2 minutes or less when you're giving public comment. But if there's a lot of people there to give public comment, they may say, please keep it to 60 seconds or less. So when you're preparing your talking points, I would suggest writing a couple different drafts. Write a draft for if you only have 30 seconds, one if you have 60 seconds, one if you have 2 minutes. And if you end up getting the full 2 minutes, that's awesome. You can go through all those points, but be prepared beforehand. So if they say you only have 60 seconds, you already know which items you want to focus on, and you're not sitting there trying to figure out what things to cut out, right, as you're literally giving your comment. If you've written a letter to someone, to a legislator on this point, a letter or an email, if you've written something about this topic, you can use that as a starting point. But again, I would make it very concise, 2 minutes or less. Always include who you are, what your concern is, if it's a specific bill number, what you want them to do. If you want them to vote a certain way, explain why you are knowledgeable about this or why you have experience. If you have lived experience with this, if you're like, I have experienced something, I have experienced discrimination because of this thing, that's how you're knowledgeable, because you've seen it firsthand. And then I'm gonna have to move this box because it's in the way. Let's see. And then that last point, and then how will this impact you and or your family or your community? So for an example, I know there's a bill this year that's called minimum wage amendments, and it is basically, it suggests that we get rid of the rule that allows employers to pay people with disabilities less than minimum wage. That is currently a law, and this is saying that we should get rid of that. They should be paid at least minimum wage. So maybe you are someone with a disability who is getting paid less than minimum wage in your job, and you want to go and speak to this. And you can go and you can explain how this would impact you. And then they can see, like, firsthand someone who would actually be affected by this bill. Some other tips. If you want, you can bring a written copy of your testimony to leave with committee members so that they can read it later and remember what you said. If you do that, I would suggest including your name and your contact information in case they want to contact you to ask more questions or see if you want to get more involved. Maybe they want to run a bill the next year about something. And they want to get your input on what they should do and how they should do that. But even if you don't bring written copies to give to legislators, this number 2 tip, I would say absolutely, definitely have a printed copy of your written testimony in front of you. You can obviously have notes on your phone, but I would suggest having a printed copy just in case maybe your phone, maybe the internet isn't working and you're not able to access your notes, or your phone dies, something like that. I would say have that physical copy as a backup. And some people like to just make a bulleted list of the main points they want to hit. Some people like to actually have all the sentences written out. Some people will highlight the most important items, but you could also just have multiple versions. One paper that you label your 30-second version, one you label your 1-minute version, one you label your 2-minute version. And then however much time you have, grab that one, read it. Another suggestion is to just listen to the comments before you. If a lot of people before you have said similar things, you might just choose to say, I agree with the previous comments. Or maybe some people are saying some of the, like, one of the things that you were saying, but the other thing that you wanted to say, no one's mentioned that. And so you might be like, okay, I'm going to spend my time focusing on this thing that no one has said yet, because I want to make sure that the committee members know about this. And then my last tip is to practice. Practice a lot, not so that you sound rehearsed, but just so that you sound comfortable, so that you're confident in what you're saying. You can either do this with a friend or just in front of the mirror. Practice, practice, practice. And give yourself a little timer to make sure that you can give your whole statement within the allotted times. Alrighty. We just have a few things left. Let's see. So one thing I mentioned, floor time. This picture kind of shows one of the rooms that the legislators all meet in when they're discussing bills. Members of the public are allowed to go and watch these meetings. You can't participate in these meetings. You can only participate in the committee meetings. But if you want to go and watch these sessions, you can do that. That little upper balcony part in the picture, that's where the public is able to sit and watch. You can see when floor time is happening by going on the website on the home page. When you bring up the page, it has a little search bar, and then if you scroll just below that, you'll see a calendar with the events that are happening on any given day. So you just click the day that you're interested in and scroll through. You'll see Senate chamber, Senate floor time, and House chamber, House floor time. That's when they're scheduled to be on the floor. Alrighty. For in-person meetings, if you're trying to schedule a meeting during the legislative session, you might not be able to because they are so busy, but if you are lucky enough to get an in-person meeting during the session, I would say try to keep it to 10, 15 minutes tops. just because they don't have a lot of time between meetings. And make sure you stick to your time. Don't go super overtime. They will very much appreciate you respecting their time. If you're able to get a meeting outside of the legislative session, you might be able to get a bit more time, half an hour, maybe even longer. I would suggest if you're not trying to meet with them about a specific bill, I would suggest trying to meet with them outside of the legislative session, either a few weeks after or a few weeks before. When you're preparing for meetings, again, thinking about who is the legislator and how can they impact the issue, which committees are they on, like if they're on the Social Services Appropriations Committee or if they're on the Health and Human Services Committee, they may have a bit more influence on some of the disability issues. Also think who is going to the meeting. Are you bringing a friend with you, a family member, or another support person? You don't have to go to these meetings alone. I know it can be kind of intimidating. So you can think about who would you want to be there to help support you, either just for emotional support, or maybe they can also share a perspective. Make sure you have an agenda, some meeting notes prepared, and that you know what you want to talk about before you get there. You can, if you would like, you can have a one-page handout to leave with the legislator. This could be a fact sheet, maybe with some more data and statistics. You can sometimes find fact sheets on different issues on advocacy organization websites like the UDDC or the DLC. And you can use those fact sheets, or if you've created your own, you can leave that as well. Make sure you have an action item, something that you want them to do. I had a meeting with a legislator a few months ago, and my colleague and I, we were sharing all this information. And at the end, he was like, okay, so this is all good to know, but what do you want me to do with this? So a lot of the times they will really appreciate a clear ask. You're clear on this is how I want you to act. This is what I want you to do. It's really good for them to get lots of information, but that kind of helps focus them back in on what to do with the information that you've given them. Make sure you send a calendar invite so it's on both of your calendars, and then be early to the meeting and dress well. They may be late to the meeting because again, they're pretty busy, but make sure you are early so that they know that you're taking this issue seriously. During the meeting, introduce yourself, let them know if you live in their district, summarize the issue that you want to talk to them about, and explain how it affects you and or other people in your community. Tell them the action you want them to take, and then make sure, like I said, end on time. Thank them for meeting with you, leave your contact information, any handouts or one-pagers you might have brought, and then follow up with them. Send them an email either the day of or the day after, thanking them again for meeting with you and reminding them what action it is that you want them to take. The last type of meeting, the last type of communication I will cover is hallway meetings. This is those times when you see them in the hallway, either between meetings, and you just get a few seconds to talk to them. Again, I would say for this, make sure you have a short, concise version of what you would want to say. Think elevator pitch. You might actually be with them in an elevator for 30 seconds, and that's your time that you're able to talk to them. So have a quick 30-second version where you can introduce yourself, say what the issue is, and if you have a really short story of how it can impact, that issue impacts you, share that. If you are trying to meet people between meetings, know that you're only going to get 30 seconds to a couple minutes with them. And so I would definitely suggest having some sort of handout, either a full-length letter that you've written about your issue and or some fact sheets. If you are having hallway meetings, I would suggest focusing it on you and your experience, not on numbers, data, statistics. They're not going to remember the numbers. So if you want them to know the numbers, have a piece of paper you can leave with them. But you will make more of an impact if you're making that personal connection rather than just sharing a bunch of statistics with them. And then a good thing if you do have a hallway meeting and you are able to talk to a legislator really quickly, I would absolutely suggest following up with an email later that day and just say, hey, my name is so-and-so. We met as you were leaving your committee meeting this afternoon. Remember me? And then in that email, you can leave a little bit more information. All right, so it's your guys' turn to start thinking about how you can get your stories into either a written comment, a written letter, or a verbal conversation, and how you guys can start reaching out to your legislators and sharing your stories. Are there any other questions for me? Feel free to use the Q&A function or the chat, whichever one you're most comfortable with.
And Mary, I don't know if you want to also just put in your email really quickly for any questions that may pop up for folks later on.
Yes, I will do that right now. All right. All right. I'm not seeing any questions. I'll give you another minute in case someone's still typing out the question. All right. Well, thank you everyone for coming. Again, I mentioned earlier there are other webinars happening all this week that Aubrey and her team have been working so hard to get prepared. So if you guys are signed up for any of those, look forward to that. If you aren't signed up for any of those, but you're interested, I think registration is still open for those, right, Aubrey?
Sorry, could not get my mute button to undo. Yes, that is correct. And I will put that in the chat.
Okay, awesome. I know the presentation tomorrow night, it's at the same time. They're gonna, like I said, they're gonna be going a bit more into the legislative stuff. I saw in the chat, people were asking about how to figure out whose district you live in, who your legislators are. I believe that's one of the things that they're going to be showing you in their slides. So if you want to see pictures of that, I would suggest going to their webinar to get some more of that information. They'll also talk a little bit about bills and the budget items and what the difference is between those. So I would highly recommend going to their webinar tomorrow. All right, well, thank you so much, everyone. Oh, I put my email in the chat. I'll say it out loud as well. It's murray@utah.gov. So the way you spell that is my first initial M, and then my last name URIE. So the total thing is MURIE at utah.gov. Awesome. All right. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Have a great night.
Thank you, everyone.